Hello and welcome. Tonight we're going to be talking about a topic that I think you're all aware of. Some of you are probably practicing it. Some of you are probably thinking you should practice it, as I am. We're going to be talking about mindfulness. And we've been hearing a lot about it lately. My guest is the perfect person to share with all of us more about what it entails. Jeannine Myrvik is my guest. I heard Jeannine speak 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was so impressed. And I thought, oh, she'd be a wonderful guest. We're going to talk about some of the benefits of it. She's going to do a demonstration. And as I told her a few minutes ago, there are several things related to mindfulness that I think, unless you're a great student of it, you may not be aware of it. And I think they're exciting, talking about self-compassion and dealing with pain and acceptance of what is in our lives. So, welcome, Jeannine.
Thank you.
She is a LICSW, licensed independent clinical social worker. You wear a lot of hats. You teach classes for Alina. You are in private practice at the Minnesota Center for Psychology. She does retreats, all kinds of mindfulness-related projects. So great to have you here.
Thank
you for coming. Well, how do you, if you're sitting on an airplane and someone asks you what you do, how do you define mindfulness to someone who doesn't know about it?
Well, I like to use the definition that Jon Kabat-Zinn has written about, and he says, mindfulness means to pay attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, without judgment. It means to be present. So that's really the definition. The practice of it, and I guess this is the part that I really love to teach, is that I think a lot of people think that mindfulness is meditation, and that's not necessarily the case. The truth is that we can practice being mindful every day of our life and never sit on a pillow and actually meditate. And if we do some kind of regular practice, we're going to be more mindful in our everyday life. So mindfulness is really about focusing our attention, practicing being aware of our insides and our outsides, and then being present in the present.
So we can be mindful and practice mindfulness and not be meditating.
Right.
Right. Do most people, though, who get into mindfulness, do they also start wanting to meditate, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the truth is that you don't have to practice meditation, and regular practices help you to be more mindful in your everyday life. We need to practice focusing attention. There's so many things that are vying for our attention these days that a lot of us are sort of losing the ability to focus. So one of the things we get from a regular mindfulness practice is strengthening that muscle of attention.
It's sort of like strengthening the brain, isn't it?
Yep, going to the brain gym.
And we don't think, or at least I haven't thought about my brain like that, but it was really insightful when I saw something you had written about that. I thought, that's true. I mean, we go to the gym to work on all of our other body parts almost.
Exactly.
Why not the brain?
I mean, if you think of just your everyday life of like answering phones and responding to texts and doing emails and talking to people, and our brain is multitasking all the time, and our brain gets better at what we practice. So if we practice multitasking, our brain is going to get wired to multitask, and it's going to move away from getting wired to focus. So we have to practice focus.
One of the questions I had for you, but I think you just answered it, but let me sort of flip it back to you. I was thinking, why is mindfulness so popular right now? Why is it getting so much attention?
Yeah.
But do you think, Jeannine, it's because we are so pulled in so many directions, and maybe people are craving a simpler kind of mindset?
Absolutely. I think people are really overwhelmed. I mean, that's what my patients tell me, that they just feel really overwhelmed with regular life, and they just need a something. They need a something to help them be with what is in their life. And I think that's really what people are looking for. And I think people are really losing the ability to attend. They're losing the ability to focus. I can't tell you how many patients sit down in my chair and say, I'm pretty sure I have adult ADHD. And I say, yeah, that's what everybody in that chair says.
And
and that's
do
not to
hear
say...
people telling
Yeah.
me that at parties,
Yep,
etc.
exactly. And that's not just, I mean, adult ADD is a real thing. And I think lots of us are dealing with just those traits of feeling impatient and
On
not
the
being able to
spectrum,
focus.
so to speak.
Absolutely, yeah.
That makes sense. Partly due to the computer. I mean, we're also
Yep.
pulled by it and tied to it, almost all of us. Of course, television, news 24 hours a day. I mean, all kinds of things. And one of the things I thought that was so intriguing that you talked about the other day was that one of the benefits of mindfulness is the strengthening of our immune system. And I think, again, we're also very aware that we need to keep our immune system
Absolutely.
strong. I mean, most everyone talks about that too. How does that work just physiologically in a nutshell, Jeannine?
Okay, so when we get stressed, that is our body going into fight or flight, right? And so when we go into fight or flight, our body's resources are going to that, getting us ready to fight or to run. And what it's not doing is producing new cells that help us to fight any kind of illness. So when we do regular mindfulness practice now, so now I am talking about kind of a regular practice, what it actually does is calms our body down, and it helps to bring our body out of that fight or flight, and it kind of decreases the risk that it's going to go into fight or flight again. So that's kind of how it helps our immune system.
And we're probably not in the real fight or flight necessary mode very often.
Right. I mean,
In a daily kind of way.
we evolved, right? I mean, in the day of the caveman and the woolly mammoth, this was a really helpful thing to have. Not many of us are faced with that now, right? I mean, our perceived threat is maybe not being good at something, or feeling like somebody doesn't like us, or being worried about what's happening in politics, or being worried about something that's happening in the world or in our family. That's the perceived threat, and that fight or flight is still getting triggered. So whereas it was really helpful to us thousands of years ago, it's not that helpful now.
So it's like an overreaction of the body's hormonal and total systems.
Right.
Overreact.
But this is the other part that really makes the case for why mindfulness is so important, because one of the things that we're practicing with mindfulness is focus. And the other thing that we're practicing is awareness. And so what we want is to really notice how we're thinking about things, because a lot of times our perception is what's kind of triggering that fight or flight, and a lot of times there isn't really a threat, but our perception is that there's a threat. And when we practice mindfulness, we have awareness of, oh, that's how I'm perceiving it, and then I could choose to see it different. And this is one of the huge benefits of mindfulness, of just having that awareness of, how am I thinking about it?
So kind of stopping, thinking about how we are reacting, making a choice to maybe perceive differently.
Yes.
I heard an example once that I think fits into what you're talking about, being on the freeway. Traffic jam, you know you're going to be late for a meeting, but saying to yourself, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
Maybe I can call and let them know I'm coming late, and I can listen to some music or a radio show that I'm interested in, and see it as not the end of the, work day here.
That's exactly right. And that's a great example of, oh, I'm noticing that I'm getting really stressed and anxious. What's the threat here? Oh, I think that there's going to be something horrible that happens to me if I'm late. Is that really true? That's not really true. And then I can bring my mindfulness skills to being present in the present. What's actually going on with me right now?
So you're saying you need to, though, tune into both feelings and thoughts.
Absolutely.
When you're doing this part of it. Do you think, because women have been, and I hope this isn't terribly stereotypical, but women have, I think, been more tuned into feelings throughout our growing up in adult years than most men. Does that mean that more women are doing mindfulness now, and are they more excited about it, do you think? I
don't know if I can quantify. it might be a little of an easier sell for women. And I can tell you that I have a lot of male patients that maybe were a little more resistant in the beginning, but now are really sold and really embrace it and feel like it's a big part of their wellness practice.
So when people learn about it, they get excited. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about dealing with pain and mindfulness.
Yeah.
Because we're I know we're covering the waterfront here, and
Yeah.
I'd like to have more time with Jeannine. Maybe we can have her back. But I hadn't thought of mindfulness in relation to pain much. Tell us the connection that you see and are most excited about.
So, gosh, there's so many ways to talk about this. I mean, I think that one is the idea that, pain in life is inevitable, if we're talking about emotional pain or physical pain. But suffering is optional. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that people with a lot of chronic illness, there's a lot of ways that they might be kind of reacting to their pain that's actually causing suffering. And I think that having awareness of that can help people to change that. So for example, one of the things we talk about is the first and the second arrow. So the first arrow might be, oh, I'm having more pain than usual today. And then the second arrow is, I shouldn't be having so much pain. I should be dealing with this better. Other people would be dealing with this better than me.
Or I can't deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe putting in a real
Yep.
powerful message to oneself.
Right. So, I mean, mindfulness isn't going to change the amount of pain you have necessarily. But what it does is increase your capacity to be with what is. I mean, we think we have an instinctive nature to just fight pain. And mindfulness really gives us increased space just to be with what is. I mean, a big skill that we teach oftentimes in mindfulness is radical acceptance. And we talk about pain plus non-acceptance of pain equals suffering. If you're having pain in your body and say, I don't want to have this, it's bad that I have this, I shouldn't have this, what's going to happen, why me, all of those things, we increase suffering. And if we say, it is, it's what's happening. It doesn't make our pain go away, but it increases our capacity to deal with it. And I think the other part of it is the focus. And I think oftentimes, our brains are wired to hyper-focus on the threat. Pain is always going to be the threat. Our brain is going to hyper-focus on it. So if we're practicing mindfulness, we're practicing how to focus our attention so we could choose to focus our attention somewhere else. So sometimes we do mindfulness practices in the body that are about noticing pain, accepting pain as it is, not judging pain. That's another big concept in mindfulness, non-judgment. But just to practice allowing that. And then choosing to focus your attention somewhere that isn't in pain and let your attention rest there.
I like that. And radical acceptance, I want to come back to that and just get a little more understanding about that, because when I read about it prior to this interview, I was so excited because I thought that a lot of times when something hard is going on in my life or most people's lives, I think we kind of fight it. We're like, how could this be happening? How could that person be acting like that?
Right.
Why am I reacting like this? We start analyzing a lot, at least some of us do. And radical acceptance really tries to stop that kind of pondering, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Can you explain why that kind of self-analysis isn't very helpful?
Well, so we have the equation pain times resistance to pain equals suffering. And so the idea is that when we fight pain, which is really fighting reality, right? I don't want this to be my reality, that we actually cause ourselves more suffering. In our effort to avoid pain, we just delay it and actually cause suffering.
But can this principle, Jeannine, also apply to non-pain related?
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm kind of thinking of, more the kind of things where, let's say maybe a couple is having trouble in their marriage, and one says, I just can't believe she's doing this. How can she be doing this over and over?
Right.
And that's not radical acceptance.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of times one of the things we have to radically accept is who other people are. Right? And so when we're in non-acceptance about them, we're judging them as bad, or we're saying, I wish they were going to be like this, or why aren't they more like this, or how could I make them be more the way that I want them to be? And all of that is non-acceptance. And all of that is just fighting reality as it is. And so acceptance is saying, it is. This is who they are.
So that's part of mindfulness then, to really look in kind of a paradigm shift kind of way, isn't it?
Well, and if you think about it, when you're fighting reality, you are not present.
That's
If I'm in my head saying I want this person to be different, how am I going to make them different? How can I, how can I figure this out? I'm not in the moment anymore. I'm lost.
But can that sometimes have a detrimental effect in that you then don't make efforts to get out of something that's not good for you? I mean, I can see if we carried this far in some cases, it might not be healthy.
So acceptance isn't a passive process. It's not resignation. And this is what kind of gets people mixed up a lot. They think, oh, if I accept something, then I just throw out my hands and I give up. And resignation says it's just going to suck. And denial says it's not happening at all.
Right.
And acceptance
See no
says,
evil. You're no evil.
And acceptance says it is. Now what? So
the now what is very important.
So it's an active process. Radical acceptance is active.
That's what I wanted to
Yes.
clarify, because I was thinking, oh, it could be quite a passive approach here.
Nope.
Okay.
That is really the key. Radical acceptance is an active process. So if you're using that example of this person that you're having a hard time with, and maybe you're in a relationship with them, if you really accept this is who they are, and if I'm not going to change them, and if this is who they are, now what? What does that mean? What does that mean about how I choose to interact with them, or how I choose to have them in my life? Then there's an active decision making there.
So then it leads to choice.
Yes.
At some point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's very interesting, yeah. And all of this comes about not just by magic, but by really spending time each day, right? I mean, do you advise daily kind of?
I mean, what the research says is that you would be much better off doing 10 minutes a day than an hour on the weekend. It's much more about frequency than about how much time you're doing in one sitting.
Should it be done ideally at the same time of day, or does that matter?
I mean, I think if the goal is to develop a habit, it helps to do it at the same time every day, because that just helps you to develop a habit. And I say be flexible, because sometimes we get a little rigid with things, right? If you decide morning's my time, and if you miss the morning, well, then I can't do it. So I think as much as you can, develop a habit and be flexible.
And as I mentioned before, Jeannine's going to do a little exercise, so we'll see more what goes into being mindful in an exercise kind of way. But for those who maybe aren't going to be here for the end of the show, do you have like 1, 2, 3, 4 kinds of ideas in terms of what makes a good mindfulness session?
Well, first of all, I think it's about expectations. So the goal of mindfulness is not to relax. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of people think I'm supposed to relax. So when I lead mindfulness practice, oftentimes people will say, well, I did really badly. And I'll say, well, we're practicing non-judgment. So what did you notice? Because we're practicing focusing our attention, and we're practicing being aware of ourselves. And so I'll say, what did you notice? And they'll say, well, I noticed that my mind was distracted. I say, great, that's what you noticed. And so
and that's okay then.
And that's okay. That's not bad meditation. That's just what you noticed, because we're practicing focus, and we're practicing being aware. And so when we're practicing, oftentimes a very traditional practice is to choose an object of attention. So oftentimes that's the breath. And then the idea is that you're focusing on the breath, and then you'll notice that your mind wanders. And then you'll be aware, okay, mind wandered, and then you'll just choose to bring it back. And what we talk about a lot of times is to think about the mind like you think about a puppy. The mind, when it thinks, is just doing what the mind does. That's what the mind is supposed to do, is think. And a puppy is supposed to go and just kind of explore. And so, just like a puppy would go explore, you just kind of gently bring it back to the blanket. You gently bring your mind back to the object of attention.
That makes sense. I love the puppy analogy. We're going to take a quick break now and bring on one of my assistant producers, Georgia Becker, and she's going to sit with you and do an exercise. And then when we come back, we'll quickly debrief and give you some more information if you want to learn more about it. But stay with us. We'll be right back.
All right, so I'm here with my new friend Georgia, and we are going to do just kind of an example of a practice, and it's going to be super short because usually we'd like to do about 10 minutes, but just to kind of give you an idea of kind of the setup and then just a little bit of what you do, okay?
Okay.
So I want you to find an upright, wakeful, dignified position, and what we say about posture is that you're really balancing rest with alertness. And you can just let your hands just be like they are, relaxed on your lap. And you can either close your eyes or you can keep your eyes open and just kind of find a spot on the floor in front of you to gaze softly at. Whatever works for you.
I think I'll close my eyes.
All right, sounds good. And then just go ahead and kind of follow what I'm telling you. And so we're going to start by just helping you to ground yourself in this moment with your body. And so starting with the touch points, the places where your body touches. And so notice your feet on the floor. Notice your sits bones in the chair. Notice your back resting against the back of your chair. Notice your hands resting in your lap. Notice your eyelids closed. And notice your lips touching. And now bring your awareness to the breath. And you don't have to breathe any particular way, just notice how you are breathing. And just let this be the object of attention. And just let your focus be on the breath. So breathing in, notice you're breathing in. Breathing out, notice you're breathing out. And if at any point your mind drifts away, just notice that your mind wandered. And then just gently bring your focus back to the breath. And as you do this, remember that there's nothing that's supposed to happen. We're just noticing what is happening. And really practice not judging your experience, just noticing. And just check in with yourself and notice where your mind has gone. And if you've drifted off a little bit, just bring your focus back to the breath. All right, take one more mindful breath. And then go ahead and open your eyes. All right, so one of the things that we're practicing in mindfulness is we're practicing focusing our attention and also noticing ourselves. Is there anything you want to say that you noticed?
There's a nice quietness that happens. It's a calming quiet.
Ah, nice. It's nice that happened today, and that doesn't always happen. Sometimes what you notice is a whole bunch of noise in your head. And if that's what you noticed, we would just say, that's what you noticed today.
Oh, I understand that too.
Thanks so much for practicing with us, Georgia.
Thank you.
So the things you're describing all make sense if I think of myself and thinking of being disciplined. Mm-hmm. But what about doing it more in a random kind of way during the day? Is that as effective, or I'm sure it's still positive?
Yes.
Is it?
So, I mean, the research isn't necessarily on what we would call like the informal practices, and I think they're still really helpful. There's a really cool study that talks about a wandering mind is an unhappy mind, and they took this.
It's an unhappy
mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So they had 15,000 participants, and they got 650,000 pieces of data. And what they did was send out these messages to people, asking them 3 questions. The first question was, "What are you doing?" The second was, how happy are you doing it? And the third was, how mindful are you? And what they found was that the best predictor of happiness was not the activity they were doing, but how mindful they were doing it.
That's fascinating.
Right? So, I mean, I think that there's a lot of informal ways of practicing mindfulness, which could look like mindful eating. You know, how often do you eat a bowl of ice cream and get to the end and say, like, what flavor was that? So really tasting each bite. Going for a mindful walk and really seeing everything around you and hearing everything around you and feeling the breeze and feeling the leaves falling on you. You know, these are, or having a really mindful conversation, doing nothing but just completely focusing on the interaction between you and the other person. So those are informal ways of practicing mindfulness, and what we know is that the more mindful we are in an activity, the happier we are doing it.
And that is, I mean, we're saying there's not a magic pill, but in a way, that is a very big bonus for being mindful. Because everybody wants to be more content, more happy, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a huge thing. What about using mindfulness with children, with teenagers? Can they use it and benefit?
Absolutely. There's a really cool organization called Mindful Schools, and they're doing a lot of work bringing mindfulness into the schools and teaching kids really to meditate in briefer periods of time than a lot of adults, but even just taking, you know, 1 minute of silence before they start a class.
Interesting. And I can see, I mean, children are as bombarded as we are as adults and don't have all the skills to kind of, you know, put it in perspective, so to speak. So,
and if you think about all the screens that kids have these days, they really need that strengthening the muscle of attention like never before.
That's huge. If people want to get a hold of you, we're going to put your email address up. Do you want to just read it?
Sure.
To us now?
Yep, it's J, the number 9, and then Myrvik, MYRVIK, @gmail.com.
So take note of that. And then we're also putting up the title of Jon Kabat-Zinn's book that came out in 2012, Mindfulness for Beginners. And that's you had mentioned that earlier.
Yes.
It's a good read and an easy way to get more broad information. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For coming down, and this has been fascinating, and I'm sure very, very helpful for almost everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great.